Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another Legion class guide. This is an ongoing series where I go over the core gameplay of each class and spec in the Legion Alpha, and sort of give you an idea of how they're played and how their core mechanics work. In this video, we'll be going over the Demonology Warlock. Demonology is getting a major overhaul in Legion. Its focus is getting shifted towards your demons more so than it is in Draenor. This spec now focuses on summoning and buffing your demons to really give you that demonic overseer feeling. You can get quite the army going, to the point where your demons will be doing the bulk of your overall damage, and your role is to keep them buffed and their numbers high. Just a disclaimer before we begin, unlike my other videos where I went over the Frost and Unholy Death Knight, Warlock is not my main class on live. I did a lot of training on both live and Legion to get a solid understanding of how Demonology plays and how it's changed for Legion, but keep in mind that this is from a casual Warlock's perspective. Just something to remember when I talk about a spell or give my opinion on something. And by all means, if you catch any errors, feel free to let me know so I can patch them up with annotations. Also keep in mind that this is all alpha gameplay, so things that you like or don't like are always subject to change. Anyways, let's move on. As I said, there are major changes for Demonology Warlocks. One of the biggest changes is the removal of Metamorphosis. I guess Blizzard felt that this suited the new class Demon Hunters more, so that spell has officially been given to them. Because of this, your alternative resource other than mana is no longer Demonic Fury. Instead, you're moved to Soul Shards just like Affliction spec, and it's what you would expect. You have some spells that generate Soul Shards, and you have some spells that spend them. Don't take that as Demonology Warlocks are going to be the same as Affliction Warlocks though. Trust me, they're wildly different. You can have 5 Soul Shards total, and you'll generate up to 1 passively when you're out of combat, so you can always start a fight with a demon out. A lot of spells have been changed, removed, or added. I'll go over all of them one by one in the spell book, and I'll also show them all in action so you can get a good idea of how the spec plays to see if you would like it or not. I'll go over them in order of importance, putting a higher priority on the bread and butter abilities that make up the core of the Demonology spec. And at the end of the video, I'll show you some real fights and narrate them a bit so you can see how all of this comes together. As I'm going through these, keep an eye in the bottom right hand corner of the screen if you want to see the tool tips for the exact numbers and such. First up, let's start with our Soul Shard generators. We still have Shadow Bolt. This has a base 2-second cast, deals some light shadow damage, and generates 1 Soul Shard with a 40-yard range. This is going to be one of your main sources of Soul Shard generation. Next up, we have Doom, which is a little different. You now have this in human form since you no longer have Metamorphosis, and instead of a damage over time, this deals some really heavy shadow damage after its base 20 seconds, and it also generates a Soul Shard after it pops. Stacking haste makes this pop faster, so that's going to be a pretty important stat. But even so, this spell suffers from the same problems that it did in vanilla, and that's if the target dies before it pops, it's a complete waste. So as it stands right now, this ability is pretty weak for the shorter fights, and you have to get a feel of when it's appropriate to use it and when it's not. Next up, we have the AoE generator, Demon Wrath. For this one, every enemy near your demons takes some shadow damage every second, and each time this deals damage, it has a 15% chance to generate a Soul Shard, and you can make this tick faster and faster the more haste you're stacking. One thing to note is that the AoE itself doesn't stack. Say if you have 10 demons stacked on one spot, it doesn't do that AoE damage for each demon. You can, however, use a spell while moving, similar to Hellfire on live, so that's really handy. And the range is pretty generous. It's big enough to make it so it's not super picky and annoying to maximize the number of targets hit, and it's small enough to where you can't just blindly use it and expect to get the full potential out of it. If you're hitting even just a few targets with this, the Soul Shard generation is really good even at 15%. Next we have the Soul Shard spenders. Let's start with Called Dreadstalkers. This has a base 2-second cast, a 15-second cooldown, and it summons 2 Dreadstalker hounds to attack your target for 12 seconds. It has a 40-yard range and costs 2 Soul Shards. These guys will be a pretty significant chunk of your damage from your demon army. They also leap to their targets, so even if you cast this at max range, they can close the distance quickly. Next up, we have the Hand of Gul'dan, which saw a rework. This now calls down a meteor of imps down from the sky that attack your target for 12 seconds. The meteor itself deals some light shadow damage to all enemies within 8 yards of its impact area. It has a 1.5-second base cast time, a 40-yard range, and costs anywhere from 1 to 4 Soul Shards depending on when you cast it. The amount of imps you summon will be based on how many Soul Shards you spend. If you use this at 4 or 5 Soul Shards, it'll cost you 4 and give you 4 imps. It also looks like you can summon as many imps as you want. If you have 4 up already and you want to summon another set of 4, it doesn't make that first set disappear or anything like that. You can keep track of when your wild imps will expire on the top left-hand side of your screen next to your character portrait. Each of these circles represents a different group of imps you've summoned, whether the groups be 4, 3, 2, or just 1. The imps themselves are summoned at the impact zone, and they behave just like your normal imp, except you can't control them. They cast fireballs at their target over and over until either their duration wears out or until they are killed. And we of course still have our normal demons. You have the same base 5 to choose from. We have the Voidwalker, who's still the tank. I won't go over every single pet ability since it's not very interesting. I'll only list the differences for the sake of not making this video 40 minutes long. For the most part, these abilities are the same, they just have damage or cooldown changes and whatnot. I'll still mouse over these abilities quickly if you want to pause the video and see for yourself though. For the Voidwalker, we have Threatening Presence, Shadow Bulwark, Suffering, Shadow Shield, and Void Reflexes, which are all the same. The only difference is its Consuming Shadow spell, which has replaced Torment. This deals some very light damage to all nearby enemies and returns it as life to the Voidwalker. Torment, if you recall, did some single target Shadow Strike damage, so basically it traded some single target damage for an AoE life drain to make it more tanky. Next up we have the classic Imp. Everything is exactly the same functionality wise. You still have Cauterize, Firebolt, Flee, and Singe Magic. The Fell Hunter is also the same with the exception of the removal of Devour Magic. You still have Shadow Bite and Spell Lock, but it looks like we did indeed lose Devour Magic. Your Succubus remains unchanged. You still have Lash of Pain, Lesser Invisibility, Seduction, and Whiplash, which are all functionally the same as they were in Draenor. And finally we have the Felguard. Your Axe Toss, Fellstorm Pursuit, Threatening Presence, and Void Reflexes are all the same. The only difference here is that Legion Strike is now a cleave as opposed to a flat AoE. Don't get too excited about that reduced healing debuff by the way, because that's just a tooltip error. It's actually only 10%, which is the same as it is in Draenor. Now that we have all of our demons out of the way, let's get to what is probably the most important spell for Demonology Warlocks in Legion, and that's Demonic Empowerment. This is a base 1.5 second cast spell that empowers up to 3 of your demons, increasing their haste and health by a whopping 50% for 12 seconds. They also get increased damage from Master Demonologist, which is your new mastery. This spell empowers your stronger demons first, so say if you have a Voidwalker up, 2 Dreadstalkers, and 4 Imps, this would empower your Voidwalker and both of your Dreadstalkers the first time you cast it, 3 of your Imps the next time you cast it, and your final Imp the third time you cast it. This doesn't have a cooldown, so this is something you're going to want to have up 99% of the time when you have your demons out, since it's such a huge increase. In fact, here's a side-by-side comparison of 2 single target fights. On the left-hand side I'm using Demonic Empowerment, and on the right-hand side I'm not using it. This is the exact same mob with the same health, and as you can see the difference here is pretty substantial. Keeping this spell up is going to be one of your top priorities as a Demonology Warlock, and it'll make the rotation pretty interesting. We still have Command Demon. This is pretty much the same as it is on live. This just commands your demon to use its main ability. The Imp will Cauterize, the Voidwalker will use Suffering, the Succubus has Whiplash, the Fell Hunter will use Spell Lock, and the Felguard will use Fellstorm. Next we have Drain Life, which is a little different. This now returns a percentage of your maximum life instead of just a flat number that scales with your gear. This seems to get more and more powerful as you get better gear. I'm not 100% sure on what stat this is scaling from, but as you can see here, it's 18% when I'm naked and 24% when I have all of my gear on. And we still have our classic fear. Nothing new here, just a single target fear that has a 1.7 second cast and a 20 second duration. We also still have Health Funnel to heal up our demons when they're running low on health. This takes 12% of your life over 6 seconds and returns 36% to your demon's max health. Next we have Life Tap, which restores 30% mana at the cost of 10% health. As of this build, Demonology Warlocks burn through mana quite fast, so this is pretty important. I find myself using it fairly often if I'm going from battle to battle without drinking. Summon Infernal and Summon Doomguard are still our big cooldowns. Their cooldowns were bumped down to 3 minutes, but their durations were also reduced to 20 seconds. The Doomguard still throws out single target Shadow Bolts to its target, and the Infernal stuns an area when you summon it and deals some AoE damage. And just like in Draenor, these two abilities share the same cooldown, so you have to pick the best one depending on your situation. Next up we have Unending Resolve, which is our shield wall. This reduces all damage taken by 40% for 8 seconds, and it also makes you immune to interrupts and silences for its duration. This has a cooldown of 3 minutes. We still have Demonic Gateway as well. This is pretty much the same. You bring out a portal that you and your party members can click on to zip across the area, and just like on live, it seems pretty restrictive on where exactly you can place it. We of course still have Banish, which disables an enemy for 30 seconds, and it's usable on demons, aberrations, and elementals. And finally we have Enslaved Demon, which allows you to take control of a targeted demon for up to 5 minutes. The spell itself is the same, but overall I think it'll be more valuable in Legion since obviously you'll be encountering a ton of demons since that's the focus of the expansion. And that's pretty much it for all of the important combat-oriented stuff anyways. Everything else I didn't mention are still functionally the same pretty much, maybe just percentage or cooldown changes. I'll mouse over them here quickly and you can pause the video if you want to see the exact numbers, but abilities I haven't mentioned yet are your Health Stone, Soul Well, Eye of Kilrog, the Ritual of Summoning, your Soul Stone, and Unending Breath. For passives we have Fell Armor, which increases your stamina, reduces your damage taken, and increases your healing taken all by 10% each. And like I said earlier, our mastery has switched to Demonic Empowerment. The more mastery you have, the higher damage bonus your demons are going to get for that spell. And finally, Soul Link has been moved from talents to a passive. This makes it so 20% of all damage taken is split with your active demon. It now also gives you some leech. You and your demons are now healed for 10 and 40% of the damage you deal respectively. And that's every ability and passive. If I didn't list anything from Draenor, it was either moved to talents, removed entirely, or they just haven't put it back yet. Next up, we'll go over the revamped talents, and just like the abilities and passives, I'll go over every single talent here and show you them in action. I'll also have a link to the talent calculator in the description if you want to see them for yourself. For the level 15 tier, we have Shadowy Inspiration. This causes your Demonic Empowerment to give you an instant Shadow Bolt. I like this one, not only for the damage, but remember Shadow Bolt generates a Soul Shard as well, so this is a nice little way to keep your Soul Shard generation up while buffing your pets at the same time. Shadow Flame has also made a return, although it has been revamped. This now lobs a ball of Shadow Flame at the target, dealing some light damage and some additional damage over 8 seconds. This generates 1 Soul Shard, has a 14-second recharge, a 40-yard range, and it also has 2 charges. When you stack this, it also refreshes the duration, so to maximize damage, you're going to want to stagger it. If you wait until 1 second before your first stack wears off to throw on your second stack, you'll barely be able to make it to 3 stacks, and that's when it'll start doing some big damage. Next up, we have Demonic Calling, which gives your Shadow Bolt a 15% chance to make your next call Dreadstalkers free. So this just removes that 2 Soul Shard cost tied to that spell, and I know what some of you may be thinking, it unfortunately does not refresh the cooldown, so it looks like you'll be limited to 2 Dreadstalkers at a time. It also still engages the cooldown, so take the term free here very lightly. For the level 30 tier, we have Impending Doom. This causes your Doom spell to summon 2 wild imps whenever it deals damage. This has the potential to be incredibly strong if you have a large number of targets because, just like the Hand of Gul'dan, you don't replace the imps when you hit with this multiple times. You'll get 2 imps for every Doom that deals damage, meaning if you hit 5 enemies with Doom, you'll have 10 imps. This is incredibly strong because it also combos really well with other talents that I'll go over later. Next up, we have Improved Dreadstalkers. This causes your Call Dreadstalker spell to also summon 2 wild imps. This one is actually pretty funny because, as you can see here, it summons the imps riding the Dreadstalkers like a mount. And lastly, for the level 30 tier, we have Implosion. This ability pulls every active wild imp to your target and explodes them for some heavy Shadow Flame damage to all nearby enemies. This is a pretty interesting talent. It's better used near the end of your imp's lifespan to maximize your damage. And remember, you can always keep track of the duration of your imps on the top left-hand corner to help you with your timing on this ability. For the level 45 tier, we have Soul Leech. This causes your Shadow Bolt to give both you and your pet an Absorb Shield for 30% of its damage for 15 seconds. This is a nice defensive boost, but what this doesn't tell you is that there's a cap on the maximum amount you can absorb, and it looks like it's based on your max health. At 377,000 health, it looks like it caps out at around 56,000, which is 15% of your maximum life. Mortal Coil is still in the game. This is pretty much the same as it is in Draenor. A 45-second cooldown spell that incapacitates the target and heals you a little bit. At level 100 in eye level 680 gear, it returns around 10% of your life. The only difference is the range is now 20 yards as opposed to Draenor's 30 yards. We also have Shadow Fury. This is a 30-yard range, 1.2 second cast AoE that stuns all enemies in the area for 3 seconds, and has a cooldown of 30 seconds. For the level 60 tier, we have Hand of Doom. This causes your Hand of Gul'dan spell to also apply Doom when it hits. This is one of the talents that combos really well with Impending Doom like I mentioned earlier. So for every enemy hit by the Hand of Gul'dan, you'll get 2 free imps once that Doom pops. As you would imagine, this can get out of hand really quickly, and that's not even the end of it, because there's still another talent that'll go over later that makes this combo even better. It's hard to tell because you're not given a counter on how many active demons you have, but I think there's no limit to the number of wild imps you can have currently. Don't quote me on that though, because unless we get something to tell us exactly how many we have, there's really no way to tell, because when they're summoned, they're all stacked on top of each other, so you can't really count them. This talent does have its downsides, and that's the fact that the Hand of Gul'dan will always refresh the Doom whenever an enemy is damaged by it. So if you want to get the benefit from this talent, you have to hold off on using Hand of Gul'dan for a whopping 20 seconds. Also, the Doom that's applied through this talent is the base 20-second Doom, so there's no way to speed it up. It'll always take 20 seconds to pop no matter how much haste you stack. Once again, the super long wait time on Doom can cause a lot of issues, and this is just another one to add to the pile. Next up we have Power Trip, which causes your demonic empowerment to affect all demons as opposed to its base 3. This is a really handy talent that simplifies your rotation by quite a bit. Without it, you really have to keep track of how many demons you have, and you gotta do some quick math to figure out how many times you cast empowerment. Like I said, there's no UI to tell you exactly how many demons you have, so oftentimes I'll lose track and end up just spamming demonic empowerment over and over to make sure everything is buffed. Even still, when you're limited to 3 targets, you still run into situations where, say you have 7 demons up and 6 of them are buffed, you have to use empowerment again just to buff 1 demon, which is kind of wasteful. With this, you can just cast it once and move on, which definitely helps, especially if you just picked up the spec and you're not used to the rotation yet. Next up we have Soul Harvest. This one is really straightforward. It's a 2-minute cooldown, 1.6 second cast spell that instantly refills 5 soul shards. I think it's a little weak compared to the Hand of Doom and Power Trip. If the cooldown was say 1 minute, or if it was instant cast, then maybe it's comparable. But as it stands now, this is the weaker of the 3 talents in my opinion. For the level 75 tier we have Demonic Circle, which thankfully is still in the game. This is one of my favorite abilities for Warlock, so I was pretty happy to see it stay for Legion. This has a base 0.5 second cast, and when you use it, it puts a summoning circle on the ground for 6 minutes. Whenever you use this spell again, it teleports you to that summoning circle, and it also clears all snares. This still has a 30-second cooldown like it does in Draenor. It also has been modularized into 1 ability now, so if you want to reposition it while it's already active, you have to click off the buff first. Next up we have Burning Rush, which is exactly the same. This gives you a 50% movement speed boost at the cost of 4% of your maximum life per second until you cancel it. You also may not be slowed below 100% of your normal movement speed while it's active. We also have Dark Pact. This is a big absorb shield that sacrifices 20% of your demon's current health and gives you 400% of that sacrificed health as an absorb shield for 20 seconds. If you don't have a demon active, it takes 20% of your life instead. For the level 90 tier we have the Grimoire of Supremacy, which saw a rework, and it's a pretty disappointing one to be honest. This now passively gives your pets a 20% increase to health and damage. As you may know, it used to still give you that 20% damage increase, but it also gave you a whole new selection of demons to choose from, and they were basically upgraded versions of your normal demons. The Imp got replaced by the Fell Imp, the Voidwalker got replaced by the Void Lord, and so on. So basically that's a nice selection that got changed into a dull 20% increase to health for your demons. I'm not happy with this change, and it's on my list of suggestions of things that I'll be giving to Blizzard for them to look at, because as it stands right now, this talent is incredibly disappointing compared to what it used to be. It definitely feels like a step back, and a very unnecessary one at that. Anyways, we still have the Grimoire of Service. This one was untouched thankfully. This costs 1 soul shard and instantly summons a second demon to fight for you for 25 seconds. And it'll also use its special ability immediately when summoned. The Imp cleanses you, the Voidwalker taunts, the Succubus seduces, the Fell Hunter interrupts, and the Fell Guard stuns. And just like Lives, it seems that your demons use every ability and not just the ones listed in the talent. Here you can see the Fell Guard using his Fellstorm, so this one's pretty much unchanged. Next up we have the Grimoire of Synergy, which reads when you or your demon deals damage, there's a chance to trigger Demonic Synergy, granting the other one 15% increased damage for 15 seconds. As you would guess, this only applies to your demons from your Summon Demon spell, not your Wild Imps or Dreadstalkers unfortunately. For the level 100 tier we have Summon Dreadlord, which is another demon. This summons a Dreadlord that launches AoE Shadow Bolt volleys to all targets that are afflicted by Doom. He costs 1 soul shard, lasts 18 seconds, and has a 24-second cooldown. This is a nice boost to AoE damage. It doesn't say the exact damage of the Shadow Bolt, but I did some testing and it looks like it's about the same damage of your normal Shadow Bolt. Once again, this is something that combos nicely with Hand of Doom, since that applies Doom to everything the Hand of Gul'dan hits. Next up we have Demon Bolt. This is the third talent in the Hand of Doom and Impending Doom combo I mentioned earlier. This is a 2-second improved Shadow Bolt that deals some light chaos damage, but its damage is also increased by 30% for each demon that you have out. It generates 1 soul shard and replaces Shadow Bolt. If you combine this with the imp generation of Impending Doom and Hand of Doom, this thing hits like a truck and it can get out of hand really quickly if you have a lot of targets. And finally we have Demonic Servitude. This makes your Infernal and Doomguard demons permanent pets. It looks like they haven't updated their skills yet because, as you can see here, it still says you generate Demonic Fury from their abilities. So as of this build, they have the same abilities as they do on live. And that's it for all of the talents, as of this build anyways. Next up, I'll talk about the artifacts for the Demonology Warlock, and that's the Skull of Minari and the Spine of Thalkiel. The Skull of Minari has the effect where your Demon Bolts or Shadow Bolts have a chance to enrage Thalkiel, causing him to teleport to your enemies and deal some heavy AoE shadow damage. It also fears lesser undead enemies and demons. The artifact themselves have the ability called Thalkiel's Consumption. This is a 1-minute cooldown, 2-second base cast spell that causes Thalkiel to drain some life from your pets and deals some single target shadow damage equal to the amount of life he drained. As you would imagine, this is more powerful the more demons you have out since you drain health from every single one, so this ability is best to use once the size of your demon army peaks. And these artifacts also have some interesting passives that you can unlock. You can find calculators for this all over the place, and I'll have a link in the description, but I'll go over all of the major ones here. We have Stolen Power. When your pets deal damage, you get a stacking buff. Once that stack reaches 100, your next Shadow Bolt damage is increased significantly. I imagine if you took Demon Bolt as a talent, its damage would be increased instead. Next we have Imp to the Breach. This makes it so when your imps are about to expire, they charge an enemy and explode instead of just despawning. I think this sort of makes the Implosion talent a little less valuable. I'm sure it has its places, but if you can get your imps to explode through this trait anyways, there's less of a need to take Implosion in my opinion. The only question is how the damage of the explosion from this trait compares to Implosion's damage. We also have the Expendables. If you have this trait, when your imps die, all of your other demons gain 1% additional damage, stacking up to 25 times. This seems pretty good, at least for your demon from Summon Demon anyways, since that never expires. All of your other demons expire pretty quickly, so I don't think they'll really see a huge benefit from this. And we also have Imp Slamp, which causes your Hand of Gul'dan critical hits to summon twice the number of imps. This isn't a major trait, but I actually think it's better than the other 3 I listed, because not only do you get more damage from the imps, but this also translates into more damage for your Demon Bolt spell if you took it. So I'm thinking Demonology Warlocks are probably going to be stacking Haste, Crit, and maybe Mastery this expansion above everything else. The rest of these are pretty generic, some interesting stuff, but mainly just percentage increases to abilities and such. I'll mouse over these quickly and you can pause the video if you want to read them, and like I said, I'll have a link to that calculator in the description if you want to check them out. You don't have to choose between any of these traits, you'll be able to get them all eventually. You just need to get enough artifact power, which you'll get by questing, PvPing, raiding, and so on. And that's it for all of the abilities, talents, and artifact traits as of this alpha build. I'm sure they'll add more or change some stuff later on, but that's okay because the purpose of this video is just to give you a basic idea of how the spec is played, and that's something that's very unlikely to change as they update the game. Now let's put all of this together. The only way to get an idea of how the spec is played is to see it in action, so as always I'll show you some basic fights here and narrate them a bit. Here are some single target fights. I tend to open up with the Doom. Usually if it's not one of the first things you cast, your target will die before it pops, so it's best to get those out as soon as possible. I do have Demon Bolt as my level 100 talent, so I follow up with one of those to get 2 soul shards, and then I burn those soul shards on my summoned Dreadstalkers. I also have improved Dreadstalkers, so you may see those 2 imps mounted on top of those. I like to immediately follow that up with the Demonic Empowerment to get everything buffed up, because at this point, I already have 5 demons. I did take Power Trip as my talent, so it only takes 1 cast to buff everything. And I also have Shadowy Inspiration, so I get that free instant Demon Bolt. From there, it's pretty much just Demon Bolt spam until I get 4 shards for a 4 pop of Hand of Gul'dan. Once again, following that up with a Demonic Empowerment to both refresh it on my active demons and to buff those 4 fresh imps. Now it's just a matter of just keeping up with your various summons while trying to avoid capping out on soul shards at the same time. I try to use Dreadstalkers on cooldown and also the 4-shard Hand of Gul'dan whenever I can, making sure to buff them immediately after summoning. Next we got some AoE fights. For talents I have Hand of Doom, which makes all enemies hit by your Hand of Gul'dan get doomed as well. I'm comboing this with the summoned Dreadlord, and as you may remember, he does AoE Shadow Bolts to all enemies affected by Doom, so that's a really good AoE combo. And I also have the Grimoire of Service for that extra Felguard for that second Felstorm. The AoE feels really strong. The only issue I can see is that it's pretty dependent on what talents you take. If you don't have that Dreadlord or Hand of Doom, it may be on the weaker side. And here's a longer single target fight. I have the same talents as I did on my short single target fights. I open up with a Doom as usual and follow that up with a single Demon Bolt. Once I get that shard, I immediately cast my Dreadstalkers and then buff them up. Now my goal is to get the wild imps out, so I just Demon Bolt spam until I have those 4 shards. Once I get my imps out, I buff them immediately, and once again I have the Power Trip talent, so it only takes 1 cast. I follow that up with the Felguard Grimoire, and by this time my Dreadstalkers are off cooldown, so I summon those again and buff them up. And at this point it's all in. Since I have a lot of demons, I now pop Thalkiel's Consumption to try to maximize that damage, and that's pretty much it. From here on, your main focus is just keeping up with your imps and Dreadstalkers, and making sure you're buffing them as you're summoning them. And that's all there is to it. Hopefully you have a better understanding of the core gameplay of the Demonology Warlock now. I really like how it feels. Once again, Warlock isn't my main on live, so just take this as a very casual perspective, but I'm loving the new focus on demons. In Draenor, yeah, your demons are stronger, and Demonology obviously puts a lot of focus on them, but in Legion, your demons are your damage. Your main job is to summon them and to make sure they're buffed up. It's a really unique playstyle that I think a lot of people will love or hate. I don't think there will be many people that'll be in between. It does have its downsides. Right now with the duration of your demons and their cooldowns, it feels like you're just in a constant cycle of summoning and buffing. It would be nice to be able to get a full army up and then maybe have 10 or 20 seconds to deal some damage yourself rather than just solely relying on your demons for your damage. It seems like that's what they're going for with the Demon Bolt talent, but like I said, the duration on your demons is a little too much on the low side, so you really don't have any moments to yourself where you're doing the damage. As to how competitive it's going to rely heavily on the pet AI, obviously. There are some hitches in the alpha right now controlling all of these pets. They'll aggro stuff you don't want to aggro, or they'll attack the wrong target. One thing that would really help would be an all attack or all follow button, so it's not just a free-for-all. I think PvE wise, if the AI is good, it'll do fine. PvP is definitely up in the air. I haven't had a chance to personally test it, so I can't say for myself, but if these pets are easily killable or kiteable, it's going to hurt Demonology a lot PvP wise. If you want to see more Demonology gameplay, I also did a full dungeon run. No commentary on that though, just some raw gameplay for those of you who want to see more of what the spec is capable of. I'll have an annotation for that right here and a link in the description if you want to see that. Anyways, thanks for checking out the video. Whether or not you like the changes, I at least hope you found the video interesting or enjoyable in some way. I'll be doing guides like this for every spec in the game, so keep an eye out for those if you're interested. And if you have any feedback or suggestions, feel free to leave me a message. I'm sure there's room for improvement. I had a lot of fun making this, and I hope you had a lot of fun watching it. If you want to vote on what class and spec I cover next, check the description for a link to a poll. You may notice that there are no tanking or healing classes listed. That's because I main DPS specs on live, so I want to make sure I train my tanking and healing before I make a guide on those specs, or else I think the quality would suffer. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. Give it a like if you liked it, and if you really liked it, let me know in the comments and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching, good luck, and peace!